Calgary Conservative MP Michelle Rempel-Garner says the Trudeau Liberals spent almost $6.8 million on lodging expenses for 15 people. 15 who apparently stayed at a Calgary quarantine hotel during the pandemic. Now that works out to around, $452,000 taxpayers' dollars per person. Now to talk about this in more detail is political reporter and Toronto Sun columnist Brian Lilley, who joins us once again from Toronto. Brian, $6.8 million for 15 Canadians who were put up at a quarantine hotel. Were they having champagne and caviar every night? Something doesn't quite add up here.
Yeah, most likely they were not getting that type of treatment. If you remember the description of the food that people would get at these quarantine hotels when they were a big issue, you'd get a brown banana and a stale tuna sandwich in a brown paper bag. But why did it cost so much? Because the Trudeau Liberals kept this policy in place far longer than it needed to be. Whether you agreed with the policy or not, they kept it in far longer than other countries did who had similar policies. And so you end up with just 15 people staying there in fiscal year 2022-2023. So they could have canceled it. They could have shut it down ages ago. The contract agreement, as Michelle Rempel-Garner found out in the response to her order paper question, it could have been shut down with 30 days notice. Here's what happened. The Trudeau government decided that they needed these quarantine hotels. Hotels were pretty much shut down for a good chunk of the pandemic, very little activity, especially if you're out by the airport. So they went to one of the airport hotels in Calgary and said, we would like to rent out all your rooms. So it was $452,000 for the 15 guests that stayed in the latest fiscal year. By the way, that's guests. We don't know how many nights they stayed, but it shouldn't have been that long. It was generally between 2 nights and 10 at most, and yet it still cost this much. But the year before, Hal, in 2021, they had about 1,350 guests, and it worked out to about $8,100 per person. Again, even if they're staying for 10 nights, that's more than $800 a night at an airport hotel. The hotel can make money charging far less than that. The year before that, it was about $69,000 per person. Again, the hotel can make a lot of money charging far less. So why did it cost them so much? All the extra bureaucracy they added on, the fact that they just block booked the hotel, whether they needed it or not. You've heard of the $94 million that they've spent on the hotels for the people coming across at Roxham Road. It's the same thing. The hotels are often empty, but the government just books them. It's a great deal for the hotel owner. It's a bad deal for taxpayers.
No kidding. Brian, Parliament is back in session and it's staying in kind of a hybrid format. Many MPs are not showing up in the House of Commons. Why not?
Well, some of them say that they're immunocompromised, that they don't feel safe. Look, I'm not going to say COVID's over. The World Health Organization says it's not. Doctors I know and respect say it's not. But it's not the same as 2020. And unless you are in really bad health, in which case, with this time of year with flu season and respiratory illnesses going around, you wouldn't have been showing up to the House of Commons anyway. But this allows them to continue to vote, continue to attend committee meetings. I could understand in the middle of the pandemic. I don't understand now. I don't like this. There used to be a rule that if you weren't in your seat, you could be in the chamber, but if you weren't in your seat when the voting started, your vote did not count. Now you can be on the couch in your living room. As long as you're logged in, your vote counts. This isn't how our parliament should be working, and I'm not happy that they've gone this route. The Conservatives have opposed it, but the other parties, they remain in favor.
Speaking of the Tories, during the first QP, Conservative leader Pierre Poilievre focused on inflation and a company called McKinsey. Brian, how are the two issues related?
They're not completely and easily related, but what Poilievre was trying to show is this company, McKinsey, global consulting firm. They've got beautiful offices in downtown Toronto, blocks from my office, and just stunning. And the real estate is amazing. So they're a well-off firm. Their billings went from a couple million under the Harper government to over 100 million under the Trudeau Liberals. And this is the firm that was headed up by Dominic Barton, very cozy, a good friend of Justin Trudeau, of Chrystia Freeland. He ended up being named Canada's ambassador to China for a time. So very close relationship between the Liberals and this firm McKinsey. So they got a lot of money. And what Poilievre was trying to do is say, look, Canadians are hurting right now. And as Canadians are hurting, you're spending all over the place, including $100 million on this firm. People can't afford their groceries, but you can afford to reward your good friends. So that was the point he was trying to make. We'll see if it sticks over the coming weeks as inflation, of course, is going to continue to be a big issue.
And Brian, the Tories also raised the issue of crime and its increase across the nation. They blasted the Trudeau Liberals on their record. But do the Conservatives have a plan on addressing violent gun crime here in Canada?
They do. That one issue would be to, scrap C-21 and stop focusing on legal gun owners and focus on the border, focus on the criminals. They've talked about repealing some of the measures from Bill C-75, which passed in 2019. This was the bail reform bill. They have talked about reverse onus clauses. There are a lot of issues and options being raised, including by premiers across the country. Every single premier from every political party, every province and territory signed on to a letter to the prime minister saying, we need to change bail. You made it way too easy to get. This is a problem for us because we administer the justice system. You need to fix it. And by the way, we'd like to see reverse onus if you're caught with a prohibited handgun while committing a crime. That's not the direction the Trudeau Liberals are going in. I know there's been an awful lot of focus, Hal, on the issue of crime in Toronto. We've had high-profile attacks on the transit system. A woman stabbed twice in the head, once in the back of the head, once in the face, riding a streetcar in a very normal part of town. You've had people shoved on the tracks, murdered. But crime is not just an issue in Toronto. It's up here, but it is up across the country, and it has been going up for years. And something needs to be done about it. And so far, we get a lot of platitudes from the government, but not a lot of action.
We had competing rulings from the Supreme Court of Canada on mandatory sentences for gun crimes last week, Brian. Are mandatory minimums constitutional, or are they really unconstitutional?
Both. This is why it was such a confusing ruling. And these cases, there were 3 cases. 2 of them were brought together in one appeal. Another was heard at the same time. They all came from Alberta. And so I believe one man was in Lethbridge and shot into a house. He should have received a 4-year mandatory minimum sentence. The man was high on drugs, consumed copious amounts of alcohol, took a high-powered hunting rifle, shot at a car driving down the street, then shot into a home where a husband, wife, and 2 young kids were in for the night. But the judge said, I think this is too harsh a sentence. And hypothetically, a young kid could shoot an airsoft at a home and get a mandatory 4-year sentence. That's cruel and unusual punishment. So they struck it down, not on the case before them, but the imaginary case. The Supreme Court upheld that decision, going on the imaginary one for a 4-year mandatory minimum for shooting up at a house. But there were 2 people convicted of armed robbery, and they appealed their mandatory 5-year minimum, and the court said no, that is actually fine, and it does not go against fundamental justice because of the commission of a robbery is already an egregious act. Adding a gun to the mix just makes it worse. So they upheld it in one, took it away in the other. Many of the mandatory minimums have been removed by the Trudeau government, but not all. You have to remember that. Not all have been removed at this point.
Next Monday, the final report from the Emergencies Act is set to be delivered to the Trudeau cabinet. Now, many Canadians, Brian, are not happy with the fact that it's going to the Liberals first before the rest of Canada can read Justice Rouleau's report. What happened to transparency?
Well, I'm hoping that we at least get it the same day. I can understand the government getting it in the morning and it being released to the public in the afternoon. That would not be uncommon with all kinds of reports. But I can tell you, if it's a Supreme Court decision, the government doesn't find out ahead of time. They find out at the same time as the public, or at best, you'll recall the lockups at the Supreme Court. They find out maybe an hour or so ahead of time, but they're locked in a room and not able to tell anyone. They're just able to prepare an answer for the journalists who are locked up in another room who are going to ask them questions when it comes out. But you don't get a 2-week head start. So the order in council that established the inquiry said that Justice Rouleau had until February 6th to hand a complete, fully bilingual report to the governing council. That's fancy word for cabinet. But it also said he has to lay it before both houses of parliament by February 20th. Now, here's the problem. The Emergencies Act was invoked on, invoked on February 14th. The inquiry has to report back within 360 days of that. That to me is February 17th. So there's an issue with that. It's got to be earlier. There's an issue with the 2 weeks. There's the issue with there's nothing in the law that says the government gets a 2-week head start. So why are they getting it? Why is Cabinet getting it before Parliament? This should be tabled with Parliament and therefore open to the public as well.
Will we see some of the actual Emergencies Act inquiry being redacted? That's what a lot of Canadians are concerned about.
I understand the concern. I would be shocked if it was, because I've never seen that before. That doesn't mean this government won't try it, but I would be shocked. We've seen all kinds of public inquiries and commissions in the past, but redacting the report, there's no provision in the law for that, so it would surprise me.
Brian, next week, premiers are getting set to meet with Prime Minister Justin Trudeau to discuss an increase in healthcare payments. Now, it's interesting to see that Trudeau is being nice to our premiers in some ways, such as saying he wants to see them innovate. But his coalition partner, Jagmeet Singh, wants Trudeau to take a little bit of a tougher stance. How do you think this may unfold?
I think it will unfold with Justin Trudeau being on side with the premiers. And here's the funny thing. Jagmeet Singh represents British Columbia. Sure, he's from Ontario, but his riding is in Burnaby South, in the Vancouver area. The NDP government of British Columbia is doing what Doug Ford is trying to do and what Jagmeet Singh is so angry about. They use private clinics inside the public system to perform simple surgeries. Doug Ford has proposed doing what Alberta already does, because Alberta does this. About 20% of surgeries are done in community clinics, be they not-for-profit private clinics or for-profit private clinics. It's about 20%. BC's a little bit behind there. In Ontario, it's about 2%. And with the surgical backlog, they say, you know what, let's follow what's worked elsewhere, get these easier surgeries out of the hospitals into community clinics, and we'll do it at a reasonable cost, and people will get quicker service. Singh says, no, this is destroying our public healthcare system. Trudeau, you have to stop it. Trudeau's called it innovation, and he says it's up to the premiers to decide how to do it. He just wants them to, abide by the Canada Health Act, which says you can't do extra billing. It doesn't say you can't have private delivery. We have all kinds of private delivery, whether it's the clinics I talked about in BC, in Alberta, in Saskatchewan, in Quebec, whether it's your family doctor is a private practitioner that bills the government. These are, your family doctor is not a government employee. So Singh's being disingenuous. And by the way, he just pushed the government to pass through millions and millions of dollars for a dental program that's going to go to dentists' offices, which are private clinics.
There you go. Wow. Brian, Bloc Québécois leader Yves Francois Blanchette says there's the smell of an election in Ottawa. Do you think we may see a vote this spring? The latest polls have the Tories with a 7-point lead over the Trudeau Liberals.
I'm not sure. If I was looking at that poll and I was a Liberal, I'd be saying, let's not have an election. I mean, that's not a good poll for them. They can be close to the Tories and feel comfortable going ahead based on how the votes pan out and the fact that you're confident you'll win in a campaign. But 7 points is a lot, so I wouldn't want to go. I haven't been to the nation's capital in a while, but I do, keep in touch with people. Blanchette's not wrong. I mean, there's a bit of a disturbance in the force, if you will, between Trudeau and Singh that we just talked about. There's Trudeau upsetting both the Bloc Québécois and the Quebec government over his appointment of a special rapporteur to combat Islamophobia, who said very derogatory things about the province of Quebec, about the government of Quebec. That's caused some problems. His talk about stopping provinces from using the notwithstanding clause has upset Quebec. So he's got problems with the NDP, he's got problems with Quebec, but he's also got inflation. And if you're Justin Trudeau, do you want to go out when people are really angry about the cost of everything going up? So we'll see. if things go well for him, maybe he gets a deal with the premiers on healthcare, brings in a big spending budget, and tries to go to the public and say, "Vote for me, and I'll give you everything you want." That's one scenario, but there's a lot of danger in Trudeau going to an election in the coming months that wouldn't have been there had he gone at, say last November or in previous times.
Political reporter and Toronto Sun columnist Brian Lilley, thanks so much for your time today.
Thank you, Hal.